How are you guys doing? It's about time. It's the chronological Bible study um, through the entire Bible in a year. This is Lynette, and we are the 21st century watchmen. How are you guys doing today? I pray that God is blessing your life, and you know that He's on the throne and has your best interest at heart. All right, we left off yesterday with the being consecrated and the priest being consecrated. And so today we're on the dietary laws. They had some laws. God was not playing with making sure that they were set apart. And it's important that we understand that we're supposed to be set apart. The restrictions that they have, we don't necessarily have anymore. But if we study and look at them, they are all very healthy laws. They are something that are for, that we would consider, I would consider that are for our benefit. So that's, I would suggest, and I would encourage you, good evening, to, to not shun them. So I'm going to read from the message version, and let's see what happens here. How about that? All right. It says God spoke to Moses and Aaron. So he didn't just speak to Moses now. He's speaking to Moses and Aaron because Aaron has been, consecrated and anointed to be the priest of these people and to serve in that capacity. He and his sons, excuse me. It says, speak to the people of Israel. Tell them of all the animals on earth, these are the animals that you may eat. So you may eat any animal that has a split hoof divided in two and that chews the cud, right? Let me give you which ones were the clean ones, right? Gave us you see, for instance, the camel chews the cud but doesn't have a split hoof, so it's unclean. The rock badger chews, so it goes through the whole little litany. I'll go through it. The camel chews the cud but doesn't have a split hoof, so it's unclean. The rock badger chews the cud but doesn't have a split hoof, and so it's unclean. The rabbit chews the cud but doesn't have a split hoof, so it's unclean. The pig has a split hoof divided in two but doesn't chew the cud, so it's unclean. Good evening to you. So you may not eat their meat nor touch their carcasses. They are unclean. So he's real clear about what's clean and what's not clean. So they can't eat the pig, the rock badger, the camel, all of those things. They are not to touch their carcasses. But among the creatures that live in the water of the seas and streams, you may eat any of that have fins and scales. So let me see. Anchovy, people like anchovies, right? Barracuda, bass, black is it pomfret or the manchong? Bluefish, bluegill, carp, cod, crappie, drum, flounder, grouper, grunt, haddock, hake, halibut, hardhead, herring, kingfish, mackerel, mahi mahi, dolphin, which is a type of the dolphin fish, not the mammal dolphin. So minnow, mullet, perch, pike, pollock, Boston bluefish, rockfish, salmon, sardine, shad, silver hake or whiting. That's okay. Smelt or frostfish or ice fish, snapper or ebu, jobfish, lehigh, onaga, sole, steerhead, sucker, sunfish, tarpon, trout, tuna, whitefish. These are all the fish with fins and scales. So eating that shrimp may not be the thing. These are just my thoughts. That's what the book says. They couldn't eat it. Now the Lord has made it where we can eat, everything. I mean, he's not holding us. That's not a big deal. We found that that wasn't going to hold us back from being accepted in as Christians, and into the family of God. We found that out when Peter and Paul had that discussion, and that we should not be acting like we're better than people because we eat something they don't eat, and that their diets are different from ours. And so that's important that we understand what you know what I mean. Um, that we understand that they are not bad people because they eat differently, and we can't think ourselves better because we they might be doing one thing but they're not doing another, or and we might be doing a great thing one way and we're not doing another. So we have to not be judgmental. Let God be the judge, and let God deal with people and convict them, or correct them or change them in His own timing. It's not our place to do that. They are not Jews, we're Christians, and there's a difference. And so there we go. It tells you that there's a few things that are that are not good, but I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to give you a few things in this whole thing. So let's go to get to the birds, because we've gone through the animals in the water and animals outside the water. Right? We're not finished yet. Among the creatures that live in, all flying. So let's try these. I'm sorry, I'm on 13. I'm going a little fast. I don't want to, but hey, I'm doing it. Just ride with me. All right. These are the birds that you are to detest. So don't eat them. They're birds we're supposed to just not like as far as trying to eat them, right? They are detestable. Eagles, vultures, osprey, kite, all falcons, all ravens, ostrich, nighthawk, seagull, hawks, owl, uh, cormorant, the ibis, or the water hen, the pelican, the Egyptian vulture, stork, all herons, the hoopoe, and the bat. We shouldn't be eating bat, is what it's saying. No, that was back in the day. So we should not be eating any of these things. So having, that was what they weren't supposed to be eating. I won't say that we, but I would encourage you to look at what, when you cut some things out of your diet, based on what the word says here, how much healthier you become. So it may not be a law for us, and we may not be condemned by this, but it does help when we don't eat these things. A lot of these contribute to different things. The pig for sure. Pork has polluted a lot of people's diets and has caused a lot of things that we shouldn't, having to deal with. And during the time when we were eating a lot of pork, back in the day, or having to, um, God still sustained us, but it's not the best. It doesn't digest well. So a lot of these things don't digest well. It takes a while for them to work through your system. So is that the best thing for you? If you recall, Adam and Eve they were vegetarians. They were eating fruits and vegetables. They were in pretty good health. Just throwing that out there. We can do with that what you will, but they were in pretty good health. All right, and they lived very long. Here's that, right? All right. And then it says, all flying insects that walk on all fours are detestable to you. All flying that walk on all four. But you can eat some of these, namely those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Well, those are are the crickets, the locusts, the katydids, and the grasshoppers. You can eat those four things. That's the reason. Remember, our boy was eating wild honey and locusts. That John the Baptist, that was his diet. So he was doing his thing. That's okay, to eat that, because that was, an acceptable um, bug. I personally don't see myself really eating a bug. I'm not really a bug eater. That has not been something that has been introduced into my diet, and I don't even have a mindset for that being palatable. But they were eating what they ate, and a lot of things they had exposure to, and they wanted to make sure. I mean, God wanted to make sure that they knew what they couldn't eat, because they had been a part of cultures, or at least one culture, the Egyptian culture, where they ate everything, and nothing was off limits. And so, because of you're in an environment of decadence where everything is permissible. God had to give them some restrictions. We have to make sure that that we know what's permissible for us and what's not. There's a lot of things that we can eat everything, but is it good for you? And so we have to make some distinctions about what's good for us. We should be eating to live and not living to eat. And at the time, they were living to eat. They were eating whatever they wanted to, whatever their money could buy, whatever they could afford, whatever they thought was great, the master had been eating prior to, and they wanted to live the good, rich life, and they were doing whatever. That's not what God wanted. God had a different plan, and still has one with us, for us. Um, Here's and so I'm throwing so here's some clean birds. I'm gonna throw out them clean birds: chickens, doves, ducks, goose, grouse, the guinea fowl, partridge, peafowl, pheasant, pigeon, prairie chicken. Um, then there's the sparrow, quail. We know he's fed them that. And other songbirds, swan, teal, and the turkey. So these are things that are clean that we can eat. There are a lot of things that we cannot eat, but it didn't say we should be eating. And it doesn't mention amongst the a lot of these animals or whatever that we should be eating anything. I'm going to keep on going. Every four-footed animal that goes on its paws is unclean for you. If you touch it, it's so every four-footed animal that goes on its paws is unclean for you. If you touch it, its carcass, you are unclean until evening. If you pick up the carcass, you must wash your clothes and are unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. Among the creatures that crawl on the ground, the following are unclean for you: weasels, rats. People are eating rats. Okay, though. I'm gonna stop. I'm hoping that nobody's on that page. That's a way scary situation. These are my thoughts, but I just can't see it. When I think about rats, I think about back in the day, Ben and Willard and all of those things. I'm just not about yeah, can't be doing it. And good evening to you. I see you. So but no weasels, no rats, no all lizards, geckos, not Geico. All right. Monitor lizards, wall lizards, skink, chameleons. Among the crawling creatures, these are unclean for you. If you touch them when they are dead, you are ritually unclean until evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that becomes unclean, no matter what it's used for, whether it's made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in the water; it's unclean until evening. So whatever they died on is unclean. This is how bad it was. God was like, because they they still had the habits of their masters, their former masters, and so we it sounds really restrictive to us, but God, because they had been in an environment of worshiping other gods, and God had to teach them this is what the real God, your God, requires of you. You were doing everything to worship the sun god and the moon god and the water god and all these other gods you had before me. Let me show you what the real God requires. You can't eat that. You can't touch that. All that you were touching before, that's not okay. You are a people set apart. I pose the question to you: what do you look set apart in your dietary habits? Are you doing everything everybody else does? Are you living a life of decadence? Are there no limits for you? Do Can people tell, I mean, that you're a Christian, and by how you do everything? It's not just by how you talk, but it's also everything that you do. So this is eating. How do you look when you're eating? Are you popping all the grease, and that looks unhealthy? So we should be healthy. It's not just about anything else. It's not about, okay, well, I don't eat pork, and I'm carrying my bean pie, and then I'm living foul. It's about you living right, and inwardly and outwardly, and you taking care of the temple. These dietary laws help them to take care of their temple. It's really important to make sure, um that we're taking care of the temple. This is temple maintenance, is along with everything else. So he's not just doing stuff willy-nilly. He knows what these animals and these insects, and what a fish or the water animals are capable of, and what they can do to the digestive systems, and what they can do, period. And he wants to make sure that his people, because he didn't do all the bottom feeders. Shrimp are not on this list. Lobster are not on this list. And we like all of that. Shrimp, lobster, girl. There goes the gumbo. But back in the day, we didn't have a lot of choices, I guess. And, we wanted to eat something. And so, but there's so much we can eat. It's just kind of like the tree of life. There are all these other trees, and we still want to eat what he says don't eat. We have to set ourselves apart and um get an appetite for what God wants us to have. Develop a different palate. We should be changing our palate should be changing. Our taste buds should be changing for what God wants us to have. We should embrace restrictions and worship the God that blesses us. We should not be I'm just saying we should embrace restrictions. We're so concerned about, I want to be free. He who the king has freed is free indeed. The word in Jesus, in there's freedom. Just because he says don't doesn't mean we should want to gravitate towards that. Let's gravitate towards what he says do. There's so much we can eat. I mean, it says that. I'm going back to the animals that chew the cud and part the hoof. The antelope, the bison, the caribou, the cattle, the deer, which is venison, and the cattle, which is beef and veal, um, the elk, the gazelle, the giraffe, the goat, the hart, the ibex, the moose, the ox, the reindeer, the sheep. All of those animals you can eat of, but because you can't eat of the pig, you want it. I need a pork chop. I need some bacon because I can't eat that because I can't eat that. Let's just say what we can eat. He gave us a whole list of what we can. There's so much we can do. Let's look at the freedoms what we have in God and understand that the restrictions are for a reason. God has restrictions for a reason. Let's embrace the restrictions. Let's don't look at the fence as what of where I can't go. Look at the fence as something that we as his protective his fence. It's not a gate to keep us out from something. It's a or keep us from something. It's a gate to keep something from us. It's a protective fence. And so that's how I'm looking at this Leviticus 11. I'm still going on. I'm sorry. Um, it says if an animal that you are, I'm on 39. I've skipped down to 39 and 40. Oh, let me get through here. Wow. It mentions about the anything that it dies on. If one of these dead creatures falls into a clay pot, everything in the pot is unclean, and you must break the pot. Any food that could be eaten but has water on it from such a pot is unclean. So there's so much stuff. Everything that thing touched was unclean. All these we were talking about the Shigella virus that's going around, Shigella, whichever we want to call it, virus is going around, talking about the fact that it comes from people are handling it that were that might you can get it from unwashed or unclean fruit and vegetables. People that are handling the fruit handlers and the vegetable handlers, they're unclean, and so the things that they're touching are unclean, and that makes us unclean when once we're eating it because we're not washing the things God told them to wash. Make sure you're washing your vegetables. There's so much we can get. And so we're looking at this is just way crazy. God's requiring all this stuff. If we don't wash the stuff, we will be something will happen to us. We've got to be careful about everything. And God is telling them how to avoid becoming unclean. And a virus makes us unclean on the inside. Please be cognizant of that as well. This is a warning. This is, I'm just throwing it out there. Do with what you will. It's just important. Yes, it is. Nutritional health is essential to mental health. All right. It says, if an animal that you are permitted to eat dies, anyone who touches that carcass is ritually unclean until evening. Even the ones who are permitted to eat, if it dies, whatever that means. I mean, it just dies. We're ritually unclean. If you eat some of the carcass, you must wash your clothes from the animals that even died that we were supposed to be eating. Creatures that crawl on the ground are detestable and not to be eaten. Don't eat creatures that crawl on the ground, whether on their belly or on all floors or on many feet. They are detestable. So we shouldn't be eating caterpillars and we shouldn't be eating snakes. I'm just saying, don't make yourself unclean or be defiled by them. We don't want to be defiled by anything because I am your God. Because I am your God. Make yourselves holy, for I am holy. Don't make yourselves ritually unclean by any creature that crawls on the ground. I am God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Up out of. I'm sorry, this is a little ratchet. Up out of. Come on, Message Bible. Come on with your little ratchet self. I am God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Be holy because I am holy. These are the instructions on animals, birds, fish, and creatures that crawl on the ground. You have to distinguish between the ritually unclean and the clean, between living creatures that can be eaten and those that cannot be eaten. There we go. So we got that down, right? Now we get to the childbirth. We're in chapter 12. God spoke to Moses. Now he's just talking to Moses now. Tell the people of Israel, a woman who conceives and gives birth to a boy is ritually unclean for 7 days. To a boy, right? And then of course on the eighth day he's going to be circumcised, right? On the eighth day, circumcise the boy. The mother must stay home another 33 days for purification from her bleeding. So she's gonna stay home for 33 days if she has a boy, right? Now the mother must stay home. I'm sorry, she may not touch anything holy or enter the sanctuary until the days of her purification are complete. That's just the law. You can't come in on your cycle. I mean, that was what it was. I mean, it's not that now. We all rolling in everywhere. But back then, back in the day, because there was a lot going on in Egypt, and they had to make sure they understood you couldn't present you weren't a bad person. You were not clean physically, and you had to go in there a certain way, and they didn't have all of the pads and preventive measure things that we have now. And so you had to be presenting yourself a certain way to the Lord, and they had to take care of that. It's important. I'm just throwing it out there. But 33 days they had to stay at home if they had a boy, right? Um, if she gives birth to a girl, though, she's unclean for 14 days, the same as during her menstruation or menstruation. Or is it menstruation? Menstrual period. I'll say that. She must stay home for 66 days for purification from her bleeding. I don't know why it was double time. I don't know. And she either way she shall remain in her in the blood of her purification. Shall not touch anything consecrated thing and not enter the sanctuary. 66 days, double time for girls. It is what it is. When the days for purification, because I could go on about Lord, I don't ask why. Mine is not the reason why. I do understand, but some stuff, but mine's not the reason why. God knows why, and it is what it is. But with boys, they were out there, and they could 33 days it was okay, but 66 days with the girl, maybe the girl was more needy. I know my girls were needy for sure. When the days of her purification for either boy or girl are complete, she will bring a yearling lamb for a whole burnt offering. So she's gonna take a lamb for a whole burnt offering and a pigeon or a dove. And a pigeon or a dove for the absolution offering to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, at the entrance, right? He will offer it to God and make atonement for her. She is then clean from her flow of blood. These are the instructions for a woman who gives birth to either a boy or girl. If she can't afford a lamb, she can bring two doves. So they had them. God still worked with your economic system. God had an economic breakdown. So if you couldn't afford the yearling lamb, here's what we're gonna do. She can bring two doves or two pigeons. We could just go right down to the local 7-Eleven or to the beach and get some things. I'm just throwing out what we could do if it was now. And one for the absolution offering, right? So he did one for the whole burnt offering, and the other one's for the whole burnt one for the whole burnt offering, excuse me, and the other one's for the absolution offering. The priest will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. So that God had the whole breakdown. Now we're on to the infections. That was chapter. Now chapter 12 was about the woman giving birth and how she did the difference between her being unclean before having a boy and her being unclean for her having a girl, and the difference and how she went economically to become clean enough to go back into the temple, and how the priest was to make atonement for it. There's some stuff there. And then also we knew from the chapter 11 we got the dietary laws. So these were just the laws. Can they follow them? I'm sure that Egypt had its own laws or didn't have any at all. We need to make sure that we're separate from our Egypt, which is the world. There's a way that seems right unto man, but for sure it leads to destruction. Let us not be resistant to God's restrictions. Again, his restrictions are protection. um, that's what they are. They're just protection. They're not you can't do. It's you shouldn't do. And we always have a choice. But I'm protecting you. My laws protect you. They're not to hurt you. Our God is not about that. He's about protecting. And so let's look at it as such. All right, infections. God spoke to Moses and Aaron. So on the other laws, he spoke to just Moses. On chapter 11, the dietary law, he spoke to Moses and Aaron. On chapter 12 about the childbirth, he spoke to just Moses. Apparently, Moses had a way with women. He could talk to them. Hey, listen, girls, let me tell you what's going on. Hey, sisters, let me tell you what's up. And they maybe they were more amenable to Moses. Maybe Aaron had a way with women that God knew. But now we're back to talking to everybody. So we'll talk about infections now. And this is a long chapter, be clear. But I'm going to break it on down. God spoke to Moses and said, when someone has a swelling or a blister or a shiny spot on the skin that might signal a serious skin disease on the body, bring him to Aaron, the priest, or to one of his priest sons. The priest will examine the sore on the skin. If the hair in the sore has turned white and the sore appears more than skin deep, it is serious. It is a serious skin disease and infectious. After the priest has examined it, he will pronounce the person unclean. Understand this: the priests weren't just, you know, um, praying over people during this time. They had to serve as medical examiners, basically triage nurses, if you will. They had to say this is what's going on. So God had to tell them what to look for. So God's giving medical advice here, and then they pronounce them unclean. Before that, let's not forget they had to also be butchers because God had them, and making sure that they could and burn offerings. That was a lot. So they will be on just being shepherds. He used their shepherd experience and their animals that they used for shepherding. The cattle that they were using. Those were the things that they were herding. They were allowed to offer those as sacrifices. But God used their experiences to separate them from the crowd. Remember, Egyptians didn't like cattle and all those. They weren't about that. I'm sorry, but I feel like my internet went crazy for just a minute, so I apologize for that. So I hope that you guys can hear me. It's kind of weird. So please let me know something in the chat if you can hear me still. But anyway, I feel like I froze. Like, okay, what's going on? But anyway, so Egypt was different. They worshiped the cow, but they didn't like having to deal with the cattle. Thank you, I appreciate it, Sister Felicia. And then, now we're seeing that they've moved from being just cattlemen to butchers. The priests are. They have to be able to cut that animal up, and they got to be able to, divide this and drain the blood. That's a lot of skill. There's a whole lot to being a priest then. Oh, there was. Then there was. Then before. Then what's happening now? Preachers are called to do a lot now, but they had to do a lot, and now these had to be medical examiners. How crazy is that? If the shiny spot on the skin is white but appears to be only the surface and the hair has not turned white, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 days. Quarantine. Can we say pandemic, people? Can we say leprosy, people? They quarantine you. We're used to quarantining now. We don't really understand. So before we would have like I don't get that quarantining. Now we understand. They started. God was quarantining people for a long before this. If they got this, then they have to be quarantined. He was not playing. On the seventh day, the priest will examine it again. If in his judgment, all right, medical advice again, the sore is the same and has not spread, the priest will keep him in quarantine for another 7 days. On the seventh day, the priest will examine him a second time. The sore has faded and hasn't spread. The priest will declare him clean. It is a harmless rash. So a rash between a rash and something that's spreading, right? The person can go home and wash his clothes. He is clean. So he's not going to get to change his clothes if he's not clean. If he's not been determined as being clean, right? For 14 days, he's keeping those same clothes on. Lord. But if the sore spreads after he has shown himself to the priest and been declared clean, he must come back again to the priest, who will conduct another examination. The sore is spread, the priest will pronounce him unclean. It is a serious skin disease and infectious, like eczema that spreads if you're scratching it and it's itching, and other things that scabies and lice and all things of that nature. That was not okay. Um, And so whenever someone has a serious and infectious skin disease, you must bring him to the priest. You must bring him. So if you got something that's going on, whatever's on your arm or your head or whatever else, you got to go to the priest. It was not, and he would quarantine him because of that. Can you imagine going to the priest for eczema with all the creams we have now? How many people are going to go? To the priest. Going to be a lot of them. Between eczema and psoriasis and all these other little things that a little good grief flea bite that might, so a spider bite that might spread, and as you scratching it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You're going to be going to the priest a lot. So there's a lot of things. It says if a serious disease breaks out that covers all the skin from head to foot, wherever the priest looks, the priest will make a thorough examination. If the disease covers his entire body, he'll pronounce the person with the sore clean, since it has turned all white. He is clean. But if they are open, running sores, he is unclean. So there was running sores, and then there's the ones that are closed and turn all white. It's a lot of stuff going on here. He can tell whether or not they're healed. The priest has been given specific instructions on what to look for. God has a prescription for everything, and he also has what's clean and what's not clean. And so the priest will examine the open sore and pronounce him unclean. It's a whole lot going on here. And so it goes when a person has a boil and it heals, and in place of the boil there was a white swelling or a reddish white shiny spot, the person must present himself to the priest for an examination. He was specific, about what's going on. If we looked at what God has here, we could probably um, know whether or not we need to see somebody, and how long before we checked on our little situation, as far as our own skin issues. There's a lot of skin things could be solved and really examined well if we paid attention. That these things have these skin outbreaks had white hairs and turned white and were reddish and might have had bumps in them, and they were runny sores. It's all very technical and very specific. We need to be, that way with God, and look at our own stuff and think about what they had to do. Is just a lot. They were the first doctors of health. They were. They had to be, I'm sure they prayed for the people too. They were. So it says when a person has a burn on his skin and the raw flesh turns into a reddish white or white shiny spot, the priest is to examine it. If the hair has turned white in the shiny spot and it looks like it's more than skin deep, a serious skin disease has erupted. A skin disease has erupted on the area of the burn. He is still, there's all this stuff. So boils, burns, and sores on the head or chin, all of these things, white spots, baldness, all these whether a thing was clean or not clean. Just there's an abundance of stuff in this chapter, and so it talks about as far as the diseases. So, and it says any person with a serious skin disease must wear torn clothes, leave his hair loose and unbrushed, cover his upper lip, and cry out, unclean, unclean. Can you imagine having to holler out, unclean, unclean? The woman with the issue of blood, the man with the 10 lepers hollering out, unclean, unclean. Are you prepared? I mean, what's wrong with how many people are hiding their disease? How many people with um, COVID in the last 2 years were they hollering out unclean? Nobody wanted anybody to know. So we mask ourselves up. But God knew who was unclean, unclean. Are you unclean in some way? And I don't mean just health laws. Are you unclean? Uh, God has a way to make us eat. Jesus will wash us white as snow. If you have a desire to be clean spiritually, and you feel unclean because you've sinned in some sort of way, because that's at this particular point in life, that's when we're unclean. This is our let's see Our outer is not as important as the inner. Jesus came to heal, and he came to make us clean. He came to wash us white as snow with his blood. And so I would invite you, if you have not accepted Christ today, leave your, if you watching us on the replay, put your name in the chat. We'll be praying for you. And you know that that he so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever shall believe in him will not perish and have eternal life, and that he wants you to be clean. It's important that you understand that God wants you to be clean. You don't have to walk around and feel unclean. I have sinned myself, and I felt unclean and felt unworthy. But Jesus' blood makes us all worthy. He restores us back to where God wants us in the first place, because God wants us right there under Him and serving, and He wants to be our God, and He wants to love on us. So I would encourage you to not have to deal with being unclean. Just come on into the family of Christ. There's so much in this chapter, and I pray that you all get it. I'm still going on, but I'm almost finished. It talks about if clothing, woolen or linen clothing, woven or knitted cloth of linen, or wool, leather, or leather work is infected with a patch or serious fungus, and if the spot in the clothing or the leather or the woven or the knitted material um, um, is greenish or rusty, that is a sign of serious fungus. There's fungus on your clothes back here. Show it to the priest. On the clothing and the cloth, the priest will examine the spot and then confiscate the material for 7 days. On the seventh day, he will re-examine the spot. If it has spread in the garment, the woven or knitted or leather material, it is it is a serious fungus and the material is unclean. He must burn the garment. The garments were unclean as well. And so what are we wearing? I mean, is your stuff still tearing? You know how you can see when moths are eating at your stuff. Get rid of it. Don't keep it around. I like this outfit, girl, dude. Let's get rid of some stuff. Unclean, unclean. That's the word for me today. Unclean, unclean. I don't have to be unclean because I've got Jesus, and you don't have to be unclean either. It's about time. You all have a great rest of your day. It has been my pleasure. I am Lynette, and we are the 21st Century Watchmen. We'll see you here tomorrow. You all be well. Love you.